Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a bright, sunny day here in suburban Chicago. It's November 1st, and the weather has turned chilly. It's November 2nd, November 2nd. The weather has turned chilly. It is, according to my Google Home that talked to me before I went out this morning, it said it was 31 degrees, and it feels like 23 with the wind. Although, so far I haven't encountered any wind yet. Perhaps when I go around the corner, it will be blustery. Speaking of which, I don't know if you've noticed that the sound of wind has reduced dramatically on this podcast. It's because I did buy a microphone filter a while back. It's like it makes it look like I have a little pom on my collar. It's a big puffy microphone filter, but it blocks out the wind, keeps the wind off the microphone, and it works like a charm. You may also have noticed that the podcast has fewer gaps in which I am pausing. That's because up until a couple weeks ago, I was editing gaps by hand. So, I've mentioned that I generally take a few passes through the podcast. Generally what I do is I run a noise reduction filter and a normalizing filter to kind of get the sound in a manageable volume and shape. And then I listen to the podcast at 1.5 speed to listen for places where I stop talking because there's a garbage truck going by, or sometimes I'll say something 2 or 3 times to make it sound halfway intelligent. And I go through and cut that stuff out. And that usually takes me about 20-25 minutes. And while I'm doing that, I also prepare the show notes and I prepare the image that I use for each episode. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a different image for each episode. It's, they're variations on a theme, but the idea is there's a guy with a bag and games are dumping out of his bag. And it's always the games that I'm talking about. So anyway, that's kind of my process. A couple weeks ago, I had a podcast where I was particularly hesitant, I guess is the word. I had a lot of pauses where I would stop for 1 or 2 seconds, and they were pauses that were just long enough that I feel like it's not nice to my listener to leave them in, but there were a ton of them, so I was spending a lot of time going through and cutting out these 1 or 2 second pauses. And I did a Google search, and I discovered that there is a podcast app, or there is a feature on Audacity that I hadn't noticed before called Truncate Silence, where you can tell it how long it should listen for silence. And if their silence is there for that long or longer, then it cuts it down to a half a second. Man! So since then I've been using that as the last step in editing. Instead of cutting out any pauses, I just leave them in. And then I truncate that. And it's been cutting like 2 or 3 minutes off the podcast, which is great because that's not 2 or 3 minutes of content. That's 2 or 3 minutes of silence that I'm cutting out. So I'm really happy with that. And I hope that you're enjoying the increased quality. I'm enjoying it as well. Or I think I am. I don't know. So anyway, there's a little bit of an update from Brendan regarding the podcast. I'm in kind of an updating mood because it's November 2nd, which means it's time for Top of the Stack. Top of the Stack is, of course, my monthly segment in which I share my previous month's gameplays, statistics, goals achieved or not achieved, and talk about what I'm hoping to do in the next month. As I like to remind you every few months, this feature is gleefully swiped from the podcast of Nonsensical Gamers, a much beloved board game podcast who used to do a Top of the Stack segment where they would establish what games they're planning to play in future. And then they would return to that in the next episode and tease one another that they hadn't actually played those games. Podcast of Nonsensical Gamers is in mind because Dan Halstead, one of the hosts, has a new game coming out, and it looks to be a banger. This is Bees from Next Move Games, which Next Move, I think, or it's Next Move series from Plan B. It's from the same people who released Azul and Reef. This is top quality stuff here. I did pre-order Bees as part of my Christmas game shopping. So nobody tell my family. And I'm very excited for that. So congratulations, Dan, if you're listening. And if you get a chance, go look at some of the early previews of Bees. It looks really fun. All right, on to Top of the Stack. Like always, I like to start with monthly stats. So this month in October, I played 66 different plays of 40 different games. So it put me at a year total of 663 plays of 220 games. If I'd known I was that close, I really would have pushed for 3 more plays in October, so I could have ended October with 666 plays. That would have been pretty sweet, but I wasn't paying attention. Maybe next year. Among that, I have 6 playtests of Rattlebox games. We've been really playtesting a game we're working on that I'll tell you about in another episode. And my shelf of opportunity moved from 41 games down to 37, so I knocked 4 games off the old shelf. That's pretty good. Ooh, this one takes a little conversation. My collection size, which I was seeking to reduce from 369, has artificially bloated. It actually went up 22 games since last time, because of the game reorganization that I mentioned in previous episodes. I went through and I redid my whole shelf. I moved games around. I categorized where they're going to go. Blah, 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 blah. You've heard about that already. But one of the things that happened is I also realized that there were a number of games that were not in my collection at all. And it started by, I realized I hadn't made cards for them. And I thought that was because there were a few games that I called novelty games that I just set aside and didn't make cards for. So I was like, I don't want to have cards for them. But upon reorganizing the shelf, I realized I want the whole collection listed there. Because it's confusing to see a game and then not have it in the list. I'm like, I might as well. So then, during the second step, when I was adding that second shelf in, my daughter and I went through and we looked at all the games, and I realized there's a bunch of games that were not in my collection. And I don't just mean I hadn't made cards. I mean I had not marked them in BGG on Board Game Geek as belonging to in my collection. And some of the games were like, who cares? Risk. I have a copy of Risk that was my copy from when I was a kid. I never marked that as being in my collection. Who cares? I did now. So some of the games are like that. But then I have other games where it's sort of a legit hobby game, and I guess I just never marked it when I bought it or whatever. So among all of those, I ended up adding, I think, 21 games to my collection. So my collection number is now at 411, which is not cool. I was sort of seeing 400 as a magical number in my head, as a number I should try to stick below. So I'm going to be a bit more aggressive in getting rid of games here to try to get back below that, especially because with the holidays coming back, I know I'm going to get more games. Because you know me, I love them new games. So anyway, we're at 411. My most played game in real life this month was Heist. We played 3 plays of it, my son and I did, when we played it as part of our lunchtime gaming routine. And then my most played online game was a game on Board Game Arena called Alveoli, which is an adaptation of a board game called Lines of Action, where you're moving these pawns and jumping them over. I played it 14 times online because I was part of a tournament where it was a round-robin tournament where you play against every other person in the tournament, so 14 games. It's fine. It's not probably a game I'm going to pursue a lot of, but it's a nice diversion. All right, on to top of the stack. So as you remember from last month, there were 4 games I marked on the top of my stack. One was Otis, the game I had just picked up at Fair Game during the garage sale at the end of September. One was Mountains of Madness. That was my revisit game that I wanted to try again before I decide whether or not to get rid of it. One was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the board game. That's the audience choice. This is the 2000 game from Hasbro and designer Rob Daviau, in which it's a Buffy the Vampire Slayer themed game, but in a more mass market, big box, or big long thin box kind of deal. And then my reattempt was Queen's Architect. This is a game I've had on the shelf at least 3 times, I think, in the past. I've wanted to play it for a long time, but I just haven't been able to. So how did I do? Well, of those 4 games, Otis, the sea diving game, I did not get played, alas. And Mountains of Madness, I did not get played. I really wanted to, but that one is going to be very hard to get played during our current time because my wife does not like games where you have to act silly. And Mountains of Madness has this mechanism where you go crazy and it requires you to act silly, and she doesn't like that. So I wasn't able to get that one played this month. I didn't have a time when it was me and the 2 kids and we could easily play it. So I haven't had a chance to try that one. That will go back on the shelf and wait for a time when we're not all trapped inside by disease. I did get to play Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the board game. So audience choice, thank you, you're welcome. Or thank you for suggesting that. It was fine. Really pretty good for a 2000 era non-hobby game. I definitely will keep it because it's a nice novelty and it was amusing. a little bit luck dependent, and but fun nonetheless. And then Queen's Architect, my wife and I did play actually on Halloween morning, specifically so I could meet my goal of playing it this month. It was fine. Not great. I will talk about it during I'll give it a little more attention during a Shooting from the Hip episode where I talk about a couple different games. But long and short of it is, it's not going to stay in my collection. We're one and done with that one. So I had 8 new games that I played this month for the first time. I've already mentioned Queen's Architect and Alveoli. Online, I also tried 6 Nimmt and Finca and Rallyman GT. All of these are great. Rallyman GT I've continued playing, and Finca I've continued playing. That's Finca. Rallyman GT is a car racing game that's got a dice element. It's fun, but I've done a poor job of learning it. I think I really need to make a little more effort to learn the game like I was going to learn it for tabletop, because I kind of have been letting Board Game Arena just nudge me. And then because I don't understand how the game works, I don't do very well, and then I don't like the game. As opposed to, if I really understood how everything worked, I would like the game better. So anyway, that's my problem with Rallyman, but I'm enjoying our third play of it. And then Finca is a sort of classic Euro game with very simple turns and simple decisions to make. I'm enjoying that one too. I'm on my second play of that. I had 4 games that I played in person. I mentioned Queen's Architect already and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The other 2, The Downfall of Pompeii, which was quite a delight. It's a pretty cutthroat game, but I really enjoyed putting my people in Pompeii and then trying to run them out of the city before they got killed by lava. When you put lava on one of your opponent's meeples, you get to drop them in this little volcano on the table. And oh no! It's great. I really liked that one. A nice sort of filler length or slight filler plus. And then I got to play the push your luck game Deep Sea Adventure, which is really good. Super cutthroat, like very hard. You have to be very restrained to make it back to the ship. But I really enjoyed it. We played that as part of the Toggle online game with several other people, and boy, a good time was had by all. That is quite a game. Deep Sea Adventure, fun one. Worth trying if you get a chance. That brings me up to 88 new to me games played this year. I tried 3 expansions this month: Shakespeare Backstage, Welcome to the Halloween Thematic Neighborhood, and Baron Park the Bad News Bears. I'm going to save commentary on these 3 because I think it's worth doing a Shooting from the Hip expansions episode because they're all great. I'm really looking forward to talking about those with you, but I don't want to give them short shrift, so we'll return to that. I may try one more expansion and do a 4 expansion section because some of them, it just feels like there's less to say about some expansions. All right, I kept track of my Out of the Dust plays this month. Out of the Dust, of course, is an ongoing geek list on Board Game Geek. And generally, an Out of the Dust game is a game that gets dusty if you left it on your shelf for a year. If you haven't played a game for a year, it's dusty. So a game that you've brought out of the dust would qualify for this list. And I had 5 games this month. Epic Resort, which is a sort of deck building, sort of hand management game in which you're building a tableau of attractions at a resort in a sort of Caribbean location, and you're trying to get people to come stay at your resort and heroes to come stay. It takes place in a kind of fantasy world, and then there's monsters that show up that attack your resort, and if you use the heroes to defend the resort from the monsters, then the heroes don't get the rest they want, and you don't score them for points as easily. But if you have the heroes run away from where the monsters are, then the monsters destroy your resort, or they can. And if you let one of your resort attractions get destroyed, it is brutal, very hard to recover from in the game. The original game ran a bit long, but we have the expansion. The expansion came with some updated rules to make the game a bit shorter, and it worked out great. That's a good one. That's about a once a year kind of game. It's fun, but I don't know that it would hold up to tons of repeated play. But I really enjoyed the play we had of it. That was Epic Resort. Last Will. Last time I played this was 3 years ago. Oh, Epic Resort was 1 year, 11 months, 8 days. So almost 2 years since I played that. Epic Resort, or Last Will, had been 3 years and 2 months since I last played it. Played it with my wife, and she enjoyed it quite a bit, so I think that's going to make its way back to the table again. I do really like it. It was not as good as I remembered. I guess thinking about the game compared to my memory of it, it didn't feel quite as exciting as I remembered. I'm looking forward to putting in the Getting Sacked expansion to add a little bit of flavor to it, but it wouldn't surprise me if we played a few more times, and then when I do my top 50 next time, it will probably drop. As much as I like it, I love the theme, but the game wasn't quite as great as I remembered. So that was Last Will. We played Welcome to the Dungeon. That was 1 year, 11 months, 13 days. I played that with my son. It was fine. It's not, I guess push your luck games like that aren't my favorite, but it was fine. And then Rhino Hero, which is a lovely little dexterity game from Haba, where you're building a tower. It had been 2 years, 1 month, 20 days since I played that. And again, a delightful little jaunt. Really nice. My son, I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but if not, my son has asked to start playing games during his lunch break. And so we have to pick short games because you only have a little bit of time during the lunch break. But it's fun to get something quick played, and I've been enjoying this. We've been returning to a lot of games he likes. And then I went back to Ganshan Clever, which is, I play in app form on my phone, so some people might not count this as a play, but I think of it as a solo play. I play it the same way I would if I were playing it on paper. So I had fun with that. It's been 1 year and 4 months since I played that. A few other challenges that I'm keeping track of. Our family is doing a 20x5 challenge, which I've sort of resigned myself to the fact that we're not going to finish. You know, last year by October, I was in the high 70s or low 80s in terms of percentile to finishing the games. And then in November, December, we made a concerted effort to really bring it home. We're at 44% now. So not even half of the games played. There's no way we're finishing this. I mean, technically I do play enough games that we could, but it would have to be all games from the list all the time. And given that some of the games on the list, no one has asked to play, even the person who put them on the list. I think we're just gonna chalk it up to didn't get these played this year. That said, I did manage to get a game of Elysium in and a game of Shakespeare in, which are 2 games on my part of the list. I would really like to finish the 20% of the list that I'm responsible, or 25% of the list that I'm responsible for. Seems like a reasonable approach to say we're going to play the games that I said we'd play. And both of those were great. Elysium was fun as always, and I really enjoyed Shakespeare as well. I'm also doing the 52 game challenge where there's a geek list where they give you 52 prompts for different kinds of games, and you're supposed to play one that meets each kind of prompt. I fulfilled one. You're supposed to play a game having to do with fire, and I said the Downfall of Pompeii fits that mold. I mentioned my Shelf of Opportunity log. We're down to 37. I did not add any games to my Shelf of Opportunity in October, but I did play 4 games off of it, so we're down from 41 to 31, or 37. On my expansion list, I did purchase 1 expansion this month. That was the White Moon expansion for Ghost Stories. I'd kind of given up on expansions for Ghost Stories because they're always really expensive and kind of out of print, and now with Last Bastion in print, I assumed that they would just be harder and harder to find. But then the other day, Amazon was offering White Moon for like $13 or something, which is probably half what I usually see it for, so I said sure. Ordered that with Prime, and it showed up next couple days. I haven't tried it yet, but I will. I've already explained the collection size update. No, it was 30 games that I added when I did my collection survey. Yikes. All right, 2 things left. First, my top 50 challenge. As a reminder, this is every 2 years I do a top 50 list to say sort of what are my favorite 50 games that I've played. And last time I did it, I realized that some of the games, like Last Will, I hadn't played since the previous time I'd done the top 50 list. And that seems like not a good thing. It seems like if I have a list of the top 50 games that I love, I should be playing them each once every 2 years. So that's my goal, is to play every game on my top 50 list at least once by the time I do my next top 50 list. In that regard, I am now 22 out of 50 games through that list. I played both Last Will and Baron Park this month, which brings me to the November top of the stack. What games will I be playing for next month? One of the games that I failed to play this month was Otys, O-T-Y-S, which is one of the games I bought at that garage sale, and frankly, a game I'm really excited for theme-wise, so I decided, I'm going to put that on the list already this month. So my reattempt, the game that I'm trying to play again, is Otys. My audience choice, again, the way this works is there's a link. I'll put a link in the forum on the top of the stack post to my Shelf of Opportunity, where you listeners can go and vote on what games you would like me to play. all you have to do is put a thumbs up next to the game, any game on the list that you would like me to play. And then what I do is I rearrange that list in order of the number of thumbs that are on it, and whatever game's on the top, that's the game that's the audience choice for me to play this month. For the past few months, it's been tied between the Buffy the Vampire Slayer game and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Tichu and one other one. And 2 months ago, I think I played one of them, and now I've played Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So Tichu is the last one. So Tichu is back up. I'm going to have to make a strong effort to figure out how to play this month, because it's a game that I think you learn as group. So I'm going to have to get into a Tichu group online and see if they'll let me play. But that's the audience choice. The Revisit, again, this is a game where I look at my shelf and I say, there's a game I haven't played in a while. I want to see, do I really like that game? Is it a game I want to keep? And that is Lord of the Rings, the Reiner Knizia cooperative game from 2001 that's sort of often pointed to as one of the first real co-ops in the hobby game market. I remember really liking that game, thinking it's pretty interesting and surprisingly hard. So I'd like to return to it and give it a try. So that's my revisit for the month, Lord of the Rings. And finally, the new game. I may be setting myself up for failure here because this one looks to be kind of a beast to play, but I think it'll be fun. This is Obsession, often touted as sort of a board game version of Pride and Prejudice or a board game version of Downton Abbey. Obsession is a very complex, really intricate, and very amusing thematically game about raising the prospects of your family manor and marrying off your kids. So that's the game I'd like to try to get played this month. So that's the top of the stack report for Brendan for October 2020, moving into November 2020. So listener, head on over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know what games you've been playing. What games do you have on the top of your stack? What games did you get played last month? How are you doing on any year-long challenges that you're doing? And head over to my shelf of opportunity to vote for what games you think I should play next. Thanks for joining me today. I look forward to next time that we walk together. Until then, I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.